Hello. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see everybody back across the room here. So we are back. Thanks for joining us online as well this week. We're back with our second week of what's we're just calling our small group time. This is Unit 12 in the Certainty Study. I think it starts on page 100. And we are looking at this passage of really the Mount of Transfiguration. It's Luke 9, 28 through 48. But we're going to focus on the same passage that the sermon was on this morning. Really 98 through 36, I believe. But it's good to be back. We're just going to walk through some of the questions and talk about what we heard in the sermon. And again, if you're online, I should mention too that, the certainty, and I'll put a link down in the comments. The Certainty Study is available for download as well. There's an e-version that you can just pull off of our website, absolutely free, and follow along there as well. But let's start. Let's look, Luke 9, 28 through 48 is the full passage, the glory of Jesus revealed, Unit 12, page 100, part 2. Now, I want to highlight this real quick before we move forward to this week. We are in part 2, and I've talked about this before. This study includes 4 parts. The first part was the Nativity, chapters 1 and 2. The second part is the ministry and teaching of Jesus, the ministry of the Savior, which is chapters 3 through really chapter 10. We've got 2 more weeks of that, and then we'll be out for the summer. We'll take a pause. Part 3 really begins this journey to Jerusalem, which, interesting in our passage today, we start to see this sort of planning starting to take place, right? They talked about what was all to occur in Jerusalem. And then that'll be the fall, and then part 4 will be the actual Passion Week. And the Palm Sunday, crucifixion, burial, resurrection, and we'll end on Easter Sunday. So it's really going to work nice. But the reason I wanted to highlight it again is because this is a transition week for us in part 2. As we start to get into chapter 9, there's a different tone to everything that is going on around Jesus and his followers. There are different teachings that are being taught. There are different episodes, events that are happening that completely changes the mood and the tone and the purpose of where we are in the life and ministry of Jesus. We talked about it this morning because David wanted to give some background and to this transfiguration moment. And the background really describes this changing mood among Jesus and his disciples in chapter 9. Do you guys remember any of the things that are, like, this is called biblical context. This is where if you just read the passage starting at verse 28, you can't understand it. You have to look at what's happening before it. There's no way you can get what's going on in our passage this week unless you look at the first part of chapter 9. What were some of the things that are happening in chapter 9 building up to the transfiguration? Herod. We start to see rumblings of King Herod saying, hey, what's going on up in Galilee? It's been 2 years of whatever's going on. It's time for me to understand what this is all about. And then he feeds the 5,000. So again, a major miracle. He's done those. But then in verse 18, what happens between Jesus and his disciples? Starting in verse 18. Who do you say that I am? And this is the first time that we see any of the disciples say, you are the Christ. The Christ. Well, yeah, they said these are what people are saying about you. And Peter says, you are the Christ. Which again, that's his title. That's not his name, right? Sometimes we say Jesus Christ almost like a first name, last name.
God's Messiah.
Yes, you are the Christ. So Christ, Messiah, anointed one, right? You are the one who has come to save us as promised and prophesied. First time. Not a coincidence that this is happening before we get to Transfiguration. And then he goes on to say, all right, since you've recognized this, hear my warning for you now. What is my warning for you in verse 21 through 23? Yeah, what does he say is going to happen since I'm the Christ? Okay, this is the first time we've heard about this. This is the first time Jesus is saying, okay, you recognize I'm the Christ. All right, let me tell you, you're not going to totally understand this, but I'm about to be given up. I'm about to suffer and die and for 3 days be buried and then rise again. Whoa, wait, what? Wait, what? Well, okay, you'll get it. Just trust me. Hang with me, guys. Let's keep going. But because that's me, because you've identified me properly, guess what's going to happen to you? The same thing. Right? The same sort of things are going to happen to you because I am the Christ and what's going to happen to me. So follow me, though. Right? Follow me. If you lose your life for me, you'll actually gain it. But if you gain your own life or the world's life, you're going to lose it. Man, this is like a huge kind of just changing moment from what Jesus has been going village to village, teaching and healing and demonstrating His power and His authority for 2 years. Right? Teaching the Sermon on the Mount, teaching how to pray, all of these things. And then we get to about 2 years. We're about to begin moving toward Jerusalem. And Jesus says, all right, it's time to get serious, fellas. It's time to really change this thing up a little bit. So that's part of this background too. That's the biblical context of where we are right now in chapter 9 and entering into this passage, which I got to tell you, for me, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there are certain passages that since the very first time I ever heard them, I have a mental block. I'm just challenged by it. I can't really teach it well. I don't understand exactly. And this passage has been that for years and years and years for me, until I started looking at it within our study, and really even further with the sermon this morning. Over the last several weeks, it's been this whole, light bulb thing. Like, aha. Yeah, this has been an aha. So I'm hopeful that whether with us today or in our groups during the week, or if you're just watching and you're not even part of this church, that maybe in the next 30 minutes, we all kind of have a greater aha to what's going on with this Mount of Transfiguration. I mean, even that's kind of a churchy kind of like, ooh, that sounds difficult. But let's look at that. So, as we do, historical insight this week. We've been looking at places and we've been looking at things, fig trees and, the sea and all this sort of thing. Now we're looking at some biblical characters as a historical insight. And it's really, really important because it's key to understanding the passage, that we know who Moses and Elijah truly were. So if we say Moses alone, one thing that you think of when you think of Moses, just one thing. 10 Commandments. The law.
He's a patriarch.
Patriarch. The law. What else do you think of Moses? Exodus. The whole... He never got to the promised land, but moving the people of Israel, the deliverer of the people of Israel through the wilderness, standing before Pharaoh, right? When we think of Moses alone, we have this whole large category of information that's pretty obvious. I mean, not obvious. It's pretty clear when you read through the Old Testament that he's a big part of it. Okay? Now, who's Elijah? What's one thing we think of when we think of Elijah? Prophet. Yeah, right away, right? What else about Elijah? What do we know about Elijah? Okay, against the prophets of Baal, right? All the prophets of Baal were killed at that moment, right? That he had this sort of little competition, prophetic competition, and King Ahab always against him, and he also raised the widow's son. He the flour of the widow, that filling her flour jar more than she needed, provision. Wonderful prophet of God, the prophet of God to the Hebrew people. Right? Moses was the lawgiver and Elijah was the prophet. In fact, I've made this statement. If you were to have a Mount Rushmore, and I guess it would be sort of the Mount Masada or something, in Israel, the Mount Masada of the Hebrew Old Testament, it would be Moses, Elijah, Abraham, and David. I'm convinced. Now there's a whole other cast of individuals there you could put on there, but I'm convinced it would be Moses, Elijah, Abraham, and David. So 2 of our Mount Rushmores of the Old Testament. And so when we say them together, though, what ties them together, other than just this moment, is what Jesus would fulfill. He would fulfill the law, and he would fulfill all prophecy. He will be demonstrating, and God himself will tell us in this passage that Jesus is the greater Moses and the greater Elijah. He is the true and only prophet, priest, and king. Right? So you can take that whole Mount Rushmore and you can say, well, Jesus supersedes all of them. And this is going to be a moment that not only do we see it, that God himself makes clear that that's true. He makes clear who Jesus is. Again, we can't know this passage unless we know the Old Testament, unless we know Moses and Elijah. Otherwise, we're clueless on what exactly is going on up there. So we have to know Moses and Elijah. Don't let anyone ever tell you don't need to know the Old Testament. Here we go. It's the only way to explain and understand and interpret the New Testament. And here's a great case as well. Okay, icebreaker. Let's talk about the icebreaker this week. Number one, have you ever climbed a mountain? We all got some mountain maybe or overlook or something we've been up or climbed. Can you recall the most special view that you've ever had? I always say again, I know Christy gets tired of me saying this, the place where it most makes sense that the view was worth the climb. That the place that you go back to and you say, I am so glad I went through whatever effort to get here, because I'll never forget this. One word, anybody, location? So a good conversation, because I think all of us will have that experience or have that memory, and it sort of sets the scene for where we find Peter, James, John, Jesus, Moses, and Elijah this week as they go up a mountain. So just our icebreaker for our groups if you're trying to get your groups to open up about names or whatever. So just to think about. That's a tie-in. All right, but let's look at the passage. Luke 9:28, and really I say 48, but let's focus on 28 through 36 first, and if we've got time, we'll look at some of the other passage there. But 28 through 36, can somebody... Luke account, but let's look at the second question. So question 2 in our book says, for Jews, the title Christ implied an anointed king who was worthy of glory and power. How does Luke 9:26 through 35, just thinking of that first, confirm this title on Jesus? What we just read, how would that confirm that Jesus was truly the anointed one, worthy of glory and power? And I guess in our question is that we have to all make sure we're starting with the same understanding of what the term Christ means. And I think we may have touched on that earlier, but anointed, Messiah. So again, title, and that's why a lot of the early writings, and even sometimes with his disciples, would refer to Jesus as the Christ, which I think is helpful for us. Again, sometimes we get lost and we just say, well, Jesus Christ, or we substitute, well, Christ came for me. We understand that. We're not going to be picky about that. But really, Jesus came for you as your Christ. Again, title. Christ. We don't want to just diminish the role of what Jesus played or who he is, right? So it's as if we're saying Jesus King, Jesus Messiah, Jesus Christ. He is the Christ. He is the Messiah. He is the anointed one. There is no other. Does that make sense? Right? I think that's a really important thing that most of us just take for granted or don't understand. But anytime we just sort of alternate the names Jesus and Christ, I think we're doing an injustice to actually the Christ part.
Well, here's one.
Yeah, that's right. There's a confirmation of messiahship on Jesus by God himself right there. Absolutely. That is definitely the primary confirmation. What other confirmation do we see? Do we see a word in there that we see an awful lot of?
An awful lot of glory.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Appearing in the glory.
Mm-hmm. There's a confirmation of his Christship through the glory, that what my glory has been revealed, meaning my Christ, the Christ that I am, messiahship, all of that has been confirmed. That is my title. Important moment. Yeah, Ruth. Yeah, and it's interesting too that I was noting in one of the commentaries I was looking at, it's the word for kingdom there is as a reference to the royal splendor. And for certain, this now is the moment they observe and see the royal splendor of Christ. That's the kingdom of God in their presence, the royal splendor. But before we move on to question 3, one other question. Glory. What does glory mean? I mean, we say it a lot. We throw it around. To God be the glory. Glory, glory, hallelujah. You know. The word itself in Hebrew is actually most literally, though this isn't the sort of scriptural use, but it's rooted in it. And I think this is where it kind of draws it out. The word itself meant heaviness or weightiness. So glory is just sort of this weighty, heavy, just all-encompassing splendor, majesty, brilliance, holiness. Yes, like breadth and depth, yes. Something just completely full, and again, our words don't equally translate, right? But that's sort of where it came from. It came from just a heavy weight, sort of, and so if someone was to receive glory, they were to receive the full weightiness of that, the heaviness, the depth of it, the breadth of it, the richness of it. Trying to think... there's actually some scripture like the weight of his glory, and that sort of is so. There's almost like a quantitative measure to glory, and in God's glory, it's the heaviest of all. Right? If you measured it against all other glory, it's the heaviest and the most weightiest of all. Heavy on you, yes. And so I would say that back to our worship and worth. The glory of God is of great heavy worth, great worth. It is of great, just everything about it is magnificent, right? That's what glory is, and God's glory. And so we see over and over that this is the manifestation in Jesus is God's glory. The weight of God's glory is seen in who Jesus is. And because the weight of God's glory is in Jesus, then Jesus is surely the Christ. It all kind of ties together here. Okay? Yes. 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 We will share in His glory. Our future glory is sharing in His glory, which is a weight beyond all comparison. 2 Corinthians 4:17. Don't miss that online. That's a wonderful reference to that. Great. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's how we live in the hope of future. That's how we live in a life of future hope and glory. Is knowing that expectation that awaits. Okay, that we will share in His glory, the splendor, the majesty, the brilliance, the holiness. Aha! Yes. No wonder we bow to Him too, right? And yes, that's right. Okay, question 3. What does the transfiguration reveal? We've talked about some of this. Reveal about Jesus. What did Peter not understand? So let's talk about what Peter was going to do. What did Peter say?
3 tabernacles.
He wanted to build 3 tabernacles.
But it was almost like
Okay? So let's break that down. Let's make sure we understand what he even meant. I mean, that's and this is what used to get me too, because some translations say tents. So, which the word is tent or tabernacle, right? Better translations sort of now say booths. But anyway, that's an odd perspective for us, because we say, why would he just want to build 3 different little tents for these guys? Why not just build one big tent? Or They're about to go back down probably. Why do they need a tent? What's the deal with Peter saying, Lord, let me build 3 booths, 3 tabernacles, 3 tents?
It goes back.
Well, actually more practical than that, John. Actually, it would have been something contextually, something much different that Peter had in mind.
Ah, okay.
Something much different.
Worship?
No? In a roundabout way. Do you remember what David said this morning that Peter was referring to? Yeah, we have to know this. We have to know this in order for us to appreciate what Peter said and then what God's about to say. So the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, was an annual religious holiday, right? In fact, one of our equipping classes in the not so near future, or is that right? Not so near or not so far? In the near future, one of our future equipping classes, I do want us to spend a couple weeks on feasts and festivals of the Bible. And whether that's Passover, Tabernacle, all the 3 or 4 that we want to really talk about. And this is one, the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. This was the annual observation of God's provision for God's people as they wandered through the wilderness, and the fact that He provided them with not only manna and water and deliverance, but also just their practical needs, their shelter. He just provided for them. And so what they would do is they would each build, I want to say by family, maybe it was extended families, but they would sort of just build their own little booths. I think that's the best word, because it's almost like going to a booth at the fair. A booth we might have out here on local missions day. Just something that they would use for 7 days. They would use that booth as a demonstration. There were probably some religious observances around it, and they would eat and sleep in the booth again as a way of really grounding them in goodness. God, you delivered our people in a way for 40 years that they were always on the move, and yet you still delivered them. And this is a way of us saying, hey, we're going to link arms with them. We're going to sit under your stars. We're going to sleep out in this tent, and this is a memorial to that. Okay? So great significance. And so this is now Peter saying, whoa, this is such great significance. Lord, let me build you a booth as almost an altar, but something tied more to the idea of deliverance and provision. There's Moses, there's Elijah, there's Jesus. A booth is worthy of worship for each of you. Right? I'm going to not to spend the night. This wasn't anything about that. This is something we can build as almost an altar of worship for each of you. That would be awesome, wouldn't it, guys? James, John, you with me? Come on. And, you think, yeah, that's a good idea. Peter, demonstrate their worthiness and respect and honor and all those things. And then this was what always got me. God basically says what?
He basically comes out and says,
Yeah.
This is my son.
And you know what? Even not only does he come down and say, whoa, this is my son, but he says, let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah, not knowing what he had said. As he was saying those things, God didn't even give him a chance to finish. God interrupts him. You can just see that Peter just, hey, I tell you what, guys, we got to build a booth for each of you. This is we understand what we're standing in the presence of here, Jesus. We're going to build a booth for each of you, one for you, Jesus, one for you, Elijah, one for you, Moses, and stop! The voice of God, which is infinitely and eternally more powerful than mine. But you kind of get the idea. Stop! No, you don't know what you're saying. What didn't Peter understand? Why would God interrupt him like that? Why wouldn't he allow him to go ahead and build these 3 booths or tents for the 3? Well, Jesus didn't need it, but even more importantly.
Jesus wasn't on the same level
Yes.
as Elijah.
In Peter's eyes, because he knew the Old Testament, he knew what we knew about Moses and Elijah. I got to think if Moses and Elijah were to show up in here today, wow, we would have a lot of great reverence for these guys. we would put them on a pedestal. We would want to build them a booth in our own ways and means today. And Peter's had to think the same thing, but what he was doing is he was making all three of them equal. And God said, no, you don't understand. This is my chosen son.
Well, and Jesus couldn't dwell in the tabernacle because he is.
He is the tabernacle. Well, partially some of that, yeah. Yeah. But this is my son. The voice came out saying, this is my son. Listen to him. Don't follow Moses. Don't follow Elijah. You need to follow Jesus because he is the Christ anointed one, Messiah, my son, not equal to any other created, image. Yeah. So after all this happens, this is where the aha for me really took place the last couple of weeks. Is this transfiguration? We sort of, it's all important. I mean, we see all the details are important here. And we kind of get lost in them sometimes. But the whole lesson of the entire passage is what happens after God says this. Jesus is alone, and the message was clear. Right? The message was clear. The revelation of Jesus' glory was made clear. And that would be the new covenant. That would be the revelation of glory moving forward. I loved what David said this morning. You had, on this mountain, you had the revelation of God through his law, as given to his people in Moses. You had the revelation of the coming Messiah through the prophecy in the great prophet Elijah. But now you had something that was greater than both of these prior revelations. You had the revelation of God in God himself. Because remember back to our class on tabernacle? Tabernacle meant to dwell with his people, right? So we've moved the dwelling all the way to the time where Jesus says, I'm here, I'm dwelling with you. You have seen God. I am the image of the invisible God. I am the revelation of God. We don't need the revelation of God through his law now, though it's still important. We don't need the revelation of God through his prophecy, though it's still important. You have me. And when he had said this, when God had made that clear, when the glory was now centered on Jesus, the other two were gone. Oh, that's how I feel, Joy. Yes, and that actually... again, question 4, what did Peter, James, and John know about Moses and Elijah? Well, a lot.
They know what we know.
It would have made sense that Moses and Elijah were on an equal plane with Jesus in their eyes. Mount Rushmore, right? They would have been revered much more highly than we actually revere them today for how God used them. And prior to the Messiah, I mean, again, they would have been the only ones to lift up, under God, right? And so this moment made clear for them what John just verbalized, right? That Jesus was greater than these two. And again, he was the revelation of everything that Moses and Elijah would have tried to reveal prior and used by God. That's really where the emphasis, I think, this week needs to be, is on the transfiguration, on what's going on here with God and Jesus. But let's just see what happens if we look at how is one great in God's kingdom. This is sort of the continuation of that. If we look at 9:46 through 48, this is really the end of that passage. What does Jesus say about being great? And how did that come up to begin with? Yeah, isn't that funny? On the heels of, it was almost like a defense mechanism, right? Yeah. Well, we don't fully understand it. No one's asking a question. Well, maybe if I'll look best if I'm the best. It's like almost like there's something going on where we don't understand it all, but I understand more than he does. Yeah, I think there's that, but I think there was a bit of a guilty conscience. I think there was some shame in saying, hey, we just witnessed all this and we didn't have enough faith, Jesus said. But you know what? I still have more faith than Karen has. Right? Right, Jesus? You said we don't have faith, but I bet I have more than her. You know, yeah, it is. I'm the greatest. So I have more than you. You have more. And so Jesus is, what is he? It's like he's not in the middle of it, but he knew the reasoning in their hearts. He knew why the argument had come about, because the reasoning. And I believe it's the same argument that we see here, not at River Oaks, but in the church. We see very often the argument of comparative Christianity. It's the argument of comparative Christianity when at any time I say, I don't know why they never do that and I always do. Why doesn't he ever come to this? You know, I'm here 3 times a week and they're never here. In essence, what we're saying is, well, I'm a greater believer in the eyes of God than he or she. And I think at that moment, Jesus knows the reasoning in our hearts is the comparative Christianity. And often, I think we fall into comparative Christianity when we have a defensive mechanism in our own life, or a guilty conscience, or a shame of something that says the only way that makes me feel better about why I say or do or act this way is to at least know that I'm greater than others. And this is a huge, this will preach right here, a whole sermon. Because it's so divisive. It's so unnecessary. It is so self-centered